Bayergun says, սկսիկ կատեն, բարի եկացեք բոլորը, ARPA ինստիտուտի կողմ է, ուրեմն դրի սկսինք այսօրվա մեր տասախոսությունը, նախքան տասախոսյանը սկսիլը մի քանի հայտարարություններ նորեն անոր ոսեր գրնություն բիլիլա, բայց կուզեմ գրկնել այստեղ, որտեղ կարևոր է։ Նախ եւ առաջ ARPA ինստիտուտի մասին որ գաղափար չունի, մենք կազմակերպություն ունենք, որ 20 տարի է վեր աշխատենք Հայաստանի մեջ եւ նաեւ Արցախի մեջ ունենք ծրագիրներ եւ ընդհանրապես մասնակիտական, գիտական, կրթական, առողջապահական օգնություն կդրամատրենք Հայաստան։ Ունենք նորարարության մրցում, այսինքն invention competition համասարական ուսանողներու համար Հայաստանի մեջ եւ 5 տարի է վեր այդ պրոգրամը կկատարենք, այս տարի ստացած ենք 19 հատ invention-ներ եւ այդ invention-ները մասնակիցներ ունենք, որոնք արժևորեն կքննեն եւ լավագույններուն մրցանակ կտանք։ Առաջին մրցանակը 2000 գլա, երկրորդը 1000, երրորդը 600, չորրորդը 400։ 5 տարի է վեր ասիկա գնենք եւ նպատակը այն է, որ Հայաստանի մեջ նոր ապրանքներ ստեղծվին, որովհետեւ գաղափարենք, որ Հայաստան կգնա մրցունակ երկիր դառնալ միայն եթե նոր ապրանքներ ստեղծել։ Ունենք նաեւ կրթական ծրագիր, որ կսորվեցնենք առողջ ապրելակերպ եւ կյանքի ոճ կգոչենք։ Երեխաներուն, այսինքն միջնակարգ դպրոցներուն կսորվեցնենք ծխելու վնասները, շատ խմելու վնասները, յոգալի գերագուրներու վնասները եւ այլն։ Առողջ ապրելակերպ։ Ունենք նաեւ distance learning, այսինքն հեռավար ուսուցման ծրագիր, այստեղ են մասնակիցներ, սեմինարներ կուտան եւ Հայաստան ուսանողները, պրոֆեսորները, մասնակիցները կհետևին։ Եվ այդպիսի բաներ հիմնած ենք այնտեղ Արյան Գետրոն, Blood Bank, մասնակիտական այստեղ են մասնակիցներ բերած ենք հոս եւ մասնակցությունը բարելաված, այսինքն նորոգած եւ լավագույն գետրոնները բավական ժամանակ անցուցած եւ Հայաստան կացած յանդեղը դերվույն արյան մասնակիցներուն սորվեցուցած է եւ այդ ծրագիրները գնենք 20 տարի է վեր, աստարի մեր 20-ամյակն է, պիտի դոնենք 20-ամյակը մեր հիմնադրության եւ այդ առիթով կազմակերպած ենք մեկ օրվա conference գիտաժողով Բերդեի Public Library մայիսի 19-ին ժամը 11-ին մինչև ժամը 4 պրոգրամը այստեղ է, կրնակ վերցնել եւ նաեւ ARPA-ի կորձինության մասին ամբողջ տեղեկություն կա այդտեղ կրնակ առնել եւ ունենք էջմը, որ կբարունագե կովաստի մասին էջմը, այսինքն եթե գուզեք մեր 20-ամյակի առիթով շնորհավորել մեր կորձինությունը, կրնակ այդ թուղթին վրա լեցնել ձեր մեսեջը եւ տալ մեզի։ Պիտի հրատարակենք կրկույկ, այդ կրկույկի մեջ պիտի դվի ձեր մեսեջը։ Նաեւ այդ նույն գիշերը մայիսի 19-ին ունենք Ջաշկերուտ բարահանտես Dream Palace Banquet Hall-ի մեջ, այսինքն Glendale-ի Broadway-ի վրա գտնվող ճաշարանի մեջ։ Եվ տիկետները $75 ամեն մեկու շատ կխնդրենք, շատ կքաչալերենք, որ տիկետ առնեք եւ օգնեք մեզի կաչալերեք մեր գործունեությունը։ Ուրեմն գալով այսօրվա տասախոսին Գարո Մոմջյանը մեզի իր տասախոսի այսօր The Case for Abundant Properties of Armenians in the Ottoman Empire։ Անգլերենով դիտել, այնպես որ ես անգլերենով խոսում եմ։ Garapet Grigor Momjian was born in 1957 in Zahle, Lebanon. He has received his bachelor's degree from the Institut Supérieur d'Arménologie, Hamaskaim, Beirut, as 1983, and bachelor's in history from the Armenian studies from the University of Laverne, California. In 1986, his master's from UCLA in Armenian-Turkish relations. 1890 to 1909. Since 1986, he has served in numerous positions, including as a lecturer, and has published chapters in books, textbooks and monographs, as well as research articles in Armenian studies. He serves on the editorial boards of several newspapers and on the boards of several organizations. Mr. Momjian is also a political editor and news commentator for the Horizon TV. He has received many awards from Armenian and non-Armenian organizations. He is fluent in Armenian, Western and Eastern, and Classical Armenian, in Arabic and Turkish, Modern and Ottoman, and also French. Mr. Momjian.
Thanks a lot, Hagop. I wish to take this opportunity to thank Hagop and ARPA for making this event possible. It should have been last week, but we then found out that it was coinciding with the Easter week and it was going to be a problem. So we had to postpone it by a week. So sorry for those of you who came here last week, and had to come once again. But I promise you that what I am going to offer you today is going up to make for the difference in that sense. We have to do this in English because we have some people here who don't understand Armenian. And besides, there were lots of people who wanted to have the, somehow be able to watch a DVD of the event today because they don't live in the Los Angeles area and they are very interested in the issue. The case for Armenian abandoned properties, just one thing, are you able to see the thing behind? I'm sorry for the poor choosing of some colors. I just noticed that red is not working well, but I can't do anything about it right now. I should have asked some IT people like my sons, but I didn't. That's why I have this problem now. In Turkish, it's called the enveli matruke, which literally translates into leftover properties, but in the English jargon, in the English idiomatic usage, we have to call them abandoned properties. Now, the issue with abandoned properties, and I will come to this a bit later, is that it's an issue that has not been discussed very much during the 97 years since the Armenian genocide. What were we doing for 97 years, as a matter of fact, is that we have prepared a dossier, one single dossier most probably, and that single dossier involves the Armenian genocide. I don't know if we have even completed this dossier, because for any project to reach its fulfillment in a case such as the case of the Armenian genocide, if we look at it from a political point of view, there are still issues regarding the Armenian genocide. If you look at it from a legal point of view, the case has not yet has its day in court, as they say, in order to have a final verdict and bring the issue to closure. So even in the only dossier that Armenians have been working on for most of the 97 years after the genocide, and when I speak about 97 years, we have to take into consideration that not all of this time could have been utilized for such a project, because the first 30 or 40 years were a very formative years of the diaspora, and Armenians could not do much about the issue. It was only after the 50th anniversary of the genocide in 1965 that people in the diaspora and in Armenia came out and started shouting, "Mero ogera, mero ogera," our lands, our lands. This is the file that we have been working on, and if we look at the issue also from the point of view of this quote-unquote recognition of the Armenian genocide, which was, I think, in my opinion, a game that was imposed on us. For the past 30 years, since the 1980s, we have been involved in this project, and not only effort, but also manpower, but also financially, we were sucked into this debate as if we had to prove something that had already been proven. And this is the problem with our society, in a sense, or with our intellectual thinking, with our political thinking. We very soon fall into the pitfalls that other powers to be create for us. In this case, if you look at the issue, the American administrations have for the past 30 years brought us into the issue of the recognition of the Armenian genocide, something that had been done before. Now it's proven that it had been done in the 1950s. President Reagan already declared it in the 1980s. And we didn't have to go all the way and put all this effort and money and thing into this because we had lots of other issues that we could have spent that money and effort on. But unfortunately, that was the case. On the other hand, as we were working on this, there was another issue that we were not working on. See, the issue is that the political demands of Armenians are defined by the Treaty of Sèvres. You know, if you ask Momjian, who has become, during the past several years, one of the experts in terms of the political demands of Armenians, he would say, Sèvres is important, Sèvres is this, and Sèvres is that. But in reality, in the political jargon of the day that I'm speaking about, nobody, even the signatories, original signatories of this treaty, do care about it. Because all of them went later and signed other treaties, let alone the Treaty of Lausanne, which totally negated their signatures on the Treaty of Sèvres. So we have to be very careful in terms of putting the issue of political demands, because the West always uses these issues, okay, for its own political purposes. And it still uses it today. It used to use it in 1850, okay, since 1850, when the issue of the Eastern question came about as a historical issue, and the Armenian question was attached to the Eastern question. And for the past 150 years, the West has done only one thing, okay? It has created more and more problems for Armenians, and also created a bigger problem during World War I, when it put us in such a situation where the Ottoman government of the day went as far as committing genocide against the Armenian people. So I say, in a sense, that I hold the Western powers of the day as much as culprits as the Ittihad Veteraki people who committed the genocide. Now, let's go back. The issue, if you look at the Sèvres Treaty, you will see that the political demand of an Armenia were smaller than what the real lands of Armenians were. Because the Armenians were living all over the Ottoman Empire. It was like, for example, my family comes from Cilicia, from Marash. Marash or Cilicia was not in the Sèvres Treaty. I mean, where would I go? I mean, I would have been a refugee in my own country, even if the Sèvres Treaty was to be accomplished, you know. The issue of, when we speak about the properties of Armenians, the confiscated properties of Armenians, the issue is that these properties are scattered all over the Ottoman Empire, especially Asia Minor. I tend not to use very much the word Anatolia because that's historically, it doesn't cover the whole area I'm speaking about. So it were not only, the Armenian lands were not only in the 6 eastern provinces, which is this area to the east, but all over the Ottoman Empire. This is also an issue that we have to take into consideration. What have been written or done about the case of the abandoned Armenian properties? During the 1970s, there was some meager trials by a person called Vartan Yergat, Levon Vartan, who published a couple of articles in the Haigazian Armenological Journal of the time. We didn't have much documentation at the time, so what he wrote about at that time was just a sense of the issue that we are discussing today. There were no documents available, nothing, but he was just telling that there was an issue of Armenian properties, abandoned properties, so-called abandoned properties, and that Armenians should also pay attention to this fact. After that, the major work that has been done in this regard was a book that was written by Dr. Kevork Momjian, and I presume some of you should have been or are familiar with Dr. Baljian's work. The original work was in French, and then several years ago there was an English version that was completed by Dr. Gurelian. And it was published by the Catholic Society of Cilicia, which has a fund under the name of Attorney Kachik Babikian for publications. I'm a member of that committee, and we saw it fit that this project should at least be translated into English so that the English-speaking world would know something about the initial work done regarding the Armenian properties issue. Now, note that in this one, he calls them confiscated issue, which is in reality the truth. They were not abandoned properties. Abandoned properties according to whom? Okay? So it is very important. The problem, however, with Baljian's book is that there are lots of important appendices there, which have lots of lists of properties, but usually it is concentrated on Cilicia, mostly, not on all the other provinces that Armenians had lands in. And also, Dr. Baljian couldn't have had the documentation necessary in terms of the laws that were issued by successive Turkish authorities starting from 1915 and all the way to 1928 in terms of how they were dealing with the properties that they called abandoned. Another book, which is, by the way, I think I have those books here so that you can physically see them, and if you want to, this is Dr. Baljian's book that came out about, I think in 2010. Oh wow, there is a place here where my sound is sounding even better. The other book that I want to draw your attention upon, and this is very important, is that in 2010 there was a book published in Turkey. And when I say in Turkey and I speak about books such as these, there is only one publishing house that does those. You should know that it is Belge Publishing, Zarakoglu's publishing house. This guy who just came out of prison temporarily, and I have to emphasize the word temporarily, because I'm going to use it today in my lecture and you'll see in what context. I hope that this old man who has done so much for the Armenian cause and put himself into peril in that regard would be left alone to do the work he loves, and that is publishing books and making people aware of it. And let me say this, in Turkey there is a good culture of book reading, unlike in the United States maybe, or in Armenia. So the Turks are reading books, that's interesting. And I have seen books that have gone into, they usually publish about 1,000 to 2,000 issues per book, but some books go as far as 300 publications in like 5-6 years. I've seen that kind of books, so I hope this will be one of the books. Nevzat Onaran is a Turkish human rights advocate, by the way, and a journalist. And as I say here, who has produced the only complete study of laws pertaining to the Armenian and Greek abandoned properties. And here I bring in the word Greeks because that is also part of the picture, the complete picture. We also have to add some other minorities like the Nestorians or, the Assyrians, who also have problems of that regard, of this regard. The problem with Nevzat Onaran is that she is not a historian and she is not a legal expert. So she wrote a popular book, but she brought in all the laws that were necessary. Imagine that this lady went as far as going and learning the Ottoman language in order to be able to translate those laws and also write the book. I really admire her endurance in this sense, because learning Ottoman is not an easy task. I mean, you have to put years and years into it. And this was a project that was so close to her heart. Now, the problem is that, how did I stumble upon this project, the issue of the Envalim Advocatum? It's very interesting that in 2010, while we didn't know about this book yet, Vargas Irian, an attorney in Los Angeles, calls me one day and says, I was able to secure most of the laws in their Ottoman original format regarding the issue pertaining to the abandoned properties. Would you like to take a look at those and let's find out what they are, translated and see? Because there is no work aside from Momjian's work that we knew about at the time. And so started a project that took us about 2 years. And we are finally going to be able to publish a monograph, maybe next year, if God permits, where we are going to put in not only the historical aspect of the issue that I am working on, but also the legal aspects of the issues that Vargas and several of his colleagues who he has in American law firms and who specialize in this kind of issues are going to be able to work on, so that we can put it in a historical legal context that will really serve not only the regular reader, but also the educated expert reader if he wants to have a reference book about this issue. Now let's go into what these laws are so that you would understand something about what I was talking about. Now, there were 3 important laws that were published consecutively in 1915. Now, the first law, you have heard about it. This is the law of 14, I wrote in parentheses 17. This is the difference between the Julian and the Gregorian calendar. Okay? So that you don't have that much problem, just take the 14, forget about the 27. That's an issue that for us historians, not for you, you don't have to even bother about it. This law was known as the deportation law, and this was a law which Talat signed, and I will tell you a little bit later why it was important that Talat signed it, according to which Armenians had to come out from their lands because of certain reasons, etc., etc. Then the second law, that of May 17, 3 days later, in 1915, known as the sheltering and feeding of deportees law. Because when you take people out of their homes, and those people are now left for the elements, you have to have made some preparations in order to be able to provide food and shelter for them. You know, but did this happen or not? That's another story. And law of May 28, May 28, 1915, known as the law of administering of properties and lands belonging to Armenia. Notice that in 1 month, okay, actually 2 weeks, 3 laws are coming out, okay? And this also means that when you are deporting the people, you already have in mind 2 things. That what is going to happen with the properties those people are going to leave behind, and you should have a plan of dealing with that, with those properties, okay? So it's not that it happened and then afterwards we thought, oh, what's going to happen with the properties? So the 2-week span shows that there was a certain planning about dealing with the properties beforehand. Now, what does the law of May 28, 1915, that I just spoke to you about, say? Very few words. This was a temporary law. Remember, I just told you about the word temporary? Temporary law, why? Why do you think it was a temporary law?
Supposed to come back.
Because it was not taken by the parliament. It was taken by a minister. Talat signed it, and then a couple of other ministers signed it, the small clique. And it was temporary because it couldn't become the law until it was ratified in the parliament. Okay? Actually, there are lots of issues regarding the ratification of this law if it really did happen. So the temporary law remained temporary until 1920, by the way. And what is this saying? Armenians who were sent to other places because of extraordinary political situations. Notice the wording. What is the extraordinary political situation? War. Okay? special commission established to keep written inventory which are tied directly to the Minister of Interior, Talat. Very interesting. If there has to be something regarding the properties of those people, it's not the Interior Ministry who takes care of those, but another ministry, like the Cadastre Ministry or some other ministry, that is really involved in this sense, okay? But Talat wanted to have everything in his, under his jurisdiction. You know, this guy used to be a telegram operator, and he used to have a telegram in his office and at home. So he was very good in sending and receiving telegrams. Abandoned properties, okay, the Ministry of Interior, abandoned properties, and then he says what? Settle refugees on these abandoned properties. Oh, very, very interesting now suddenly. The Armenians are going, and suddenly, very soon, the empty places are being covered by refugees from other parts that they're... Now, when the Turkish, even today, there were some Turks or Turkish scholars or Turkish politicians who say it was a temporary measure, okay, and they were going to come back to their homes. But if there is, in the law that you are writing or in the law that you are trying to impose, there is an article which says settlers, Muslim settlers, are going to come and live on these lands, live on these properties. Does this mean that you are going to allow the persons to come back and want their properties back? Of course not. There is a big question there, no? Logic implies that. And finally, he says the Cadastre and the Finance Ministries will be involved. The Cadastre Ministry is important because it deals with land issues. But why the Finance Ministry has to be involved in something like this? It would turn out that the Turks, the young Turks, were going to finance their war by the proceeds of the property sold, abandoned property sold, and they were even going to spend from these monies, if necessary, and if they would, to feed and shelter those people. Now, all the monies came in, all the monies came in into the coffers. They were called mal sandıkları, money coffers in the provinces. And then from those provinces, they would go into the central coffer, and then from the central coffer, they would be used for state expenditures during the war. The issue about what we were talking about a little bit ago, that Armenians who were deported had to be fed and protected, needed money, and that money was sometimes brought in, spent, but never to be enough for the real purpose it was brought for, okay? So most of the money was taken from Armenians for the war cause and was spent by the government or remained in the coffers of the government. But we will also see that there were other factors and other sectors in the communities that also benefited from this. The temporary law of September 13, okay? Here we go about 2 months later, May, June, July, no, actually June, July, August, September, 4 months later, there is now an addendum to the original temporary law, which says religious institutions, movable properties will be returned and not liquidated, okay? They saw that confiscating the properties of the religious institutions, the Armenian Church, Patriarchate, Catholicosate, etc., was going to create a big problem, especially with their allies, the Germans, the Austrians, etc. So they came up with this addendum to the law. But was it honored? It was not. Deportees can ask for official tapus, deeds of properties. That's a very good in writing. But when you are being deported, at that moment, how can you ask for an official tapu or deed of your property when the police or the gendarmes are coming and saying, you have to go, and they are using force to do so, okay? And most importantly, the Armenian debts will be paid through the commissions. Remember, there were commissions who were going to write down, inventorize the issues. Now, apparently, Armenians had also debts on their properties. And those were debts mostly from the famous Ziraat Bankası, the agricultural bank. And so every time one of those properties were going to be sold, okay, oh, this guy had debt to the Ziraat Bankası, so the Ziraat Bankası has to take his part immediately, okay, out of the sum. Now, this is an order, and those are all, by the way, things we have discovered. Some of them were things we discovered from the public domain, but still we had to search for them. But this is especially a very important order from Talat that is not yet published in other places. Please look at the list of those places, guys, and tell me if there is anybody here whose hometown or home province is not included in this list. To the tasfiye commissions, liquidation commissions of blah, blah, blah. Erzurum, Adana, Ankara, Bitlis, Aleppo, Diyarbakir, Sivas, Trabzon. Go on and on. There is no single province or town or city in the Ottoman Empire that is not mentioned here. But what is the real order that Talat is sending? Here it is. It is ordered that special companies be formed for the liquidation of real and temporal Armenian properties left behind by the deportees in order to give their ownership to Muslims under the color of law. These companies must remain in effect and their boards must be elected from religious and able citizens. Righteous, I mean. Efforts must be utilized so that the shares of these companies will not be priced over 1 Turkish lira, which means 1 gold or paper lira, depending, and that the shares will not fall into the hands of foreign investors. We urge you to keep us informed of all details regarding these actions. Typical Talat, by the way. He has to know everything. Okay? Now, looking at this order, can you tell me what is striking for you in this order? Some of the aspects in it?
Foreign investors.
That's one issue, huh? And what is that, you think? Why? What was happening in the Ottoman Empire in 1915? Who were the foreign investors left or remaining in the Ottoman Empire? Germans and Austrians. Okay? So Talat was making sure that not even the Germans or the Austrians will get their hands on those properties. Okay? Something else, if anybody can see? Under the color of law. Very good, huh? You have to do this by the law, so that nobody sees what's happening. And the shares will not fall into the hands of foreign investors. Very clever. Law of January 8, 1920. Suddenly, the genocide is over now. The Ottoman Empire is defeated. It signs the Mudros Armistice what year? 1918. October. What is the date of this law? January 8, 1920. There is almost 1.5 years between the signing of the Mudros Armistice and this law. Why is this law important? Because this is the law that the defeated Ottoman Empire said that the law which came out in 1915, the temporary law, is now rescinded. Okay? Article 2 says the immovable properties mentioned in Article 1, which have been expropriated according to rules and regulations. Look, even here. They were expropriated according to rules and regulations, okay, under the color of law, will be returned and will be dealt with in accordance with these rules and regulations. Article 4 says what? Proving their identity by official documents and or through notarized affidavits. So Armenians who wanted to get their lands back or their properties have to prove their identity. And if they don't have any identity documentation with them because they were deported ad hoc before they could even have their paperwork with them, what would happen? Nothing. Besides, this law is taken in Constantinople, okay, through the parliament or through the new government. But what is happening in 1920 in most of Turkey? Okay, there is a new movement. The Kemalist movement is starting, and no Armenian would dare go inside the country. Okay, why? We said why here, huh? Because, as we said, it was in Constantinople. Now, let's go and say, the best example of the implementation or lack of implementation happened in where? We know that in 1920, no Armenian was going to venture to go back into those areas where the nationalist governments and its chatas were taking over, okay? But there was a certain area in the Ottoman Empire where Armenians did return in 1918, after 1918. What was that? Cilicia, huh? 1918 to 1921. But there was supposed to be a French mandate. No wonder that Kemalist agitation started with Cilicia and Marash, to be more exact. I come from Marash, so that's very dear to my heart. And the Kemalists had their first action in Marash in January of 1920. But the important thing here is this. I have written about this in one of the chapters about Armenian Cilicia that Professor Ovanesyan, the conferences that he did. How could you explain the fact that out of 120,000 Armenians who went back to Cilicia from 1918 to 1919, about 60,000 of them who were native of Cilicia and its towns and cities and villages were living in shamble camps in Adana, okay, rather than going to their lands and properties. Because even under French mandate, they couldn't or were not able to go and get back their lands. Because of harassment and because also of collusion between the French and the Kemalist forces. Don't forget that in 1919, there is already a French general who is visiting Ankara, and in 1920, there is the French-Turkish new agreement by which France sells off Armenians in Cilicia and says, I'm going to start having good relations with Turkey. Okay, now the issue is gone out of the hands of Ittihad Vetereki because it's not in power anymore, and we are starting to deal with the issue of Armenian properties from the prism of the new nationalist government, the Kemalist government. Look at this very important document that we were able to, by the way, this is the real document. And you will see that Mustafa Kemal Atatürk's signature is the one in a circle. This is one of the documents, by the way, that Vargas was able to secure. What does it say? The translation of this Arabic letter document is, after reading the letter of the Minister of Interior dated June 4, 1920 and carrying the serial number 769, which made us aware that Armenians are being led group by group into Constantinople and other coastal cities, and those capable amongst them are being armed by foreigners, Western powers, and are thus oppressing Muslims, it is decided that their free movement and travel within the country is considered improper and is thus informed to the proper authorities for reinforcement. This is the law that we are calling Armenians not to enter Turkey, okay? And this is the original of that law. And this also proves one thing. Some historians today are trying to say that Kemal was a different person from the Ittihad Veterekijis like Talat, Enver, etc. Kemal should be taken out from the thing. Kemal even executed some of the things. Those are BS, okay? Kemal executed those people for one reason, because he wanted to get rid of them as political rivalries arose, and also, okay, because he wanted to have supreme power in his own hands. But this kind of a law coming from him implies one thing, that he is doing the same thing. A continuum existed between the Ittihad wa Taraqi government and the Kemalist government, especially when it comes to the issue of abandoned Armenian properties. Okay? Because it is continuing. The same policies are being continued. We come to law of April 20, 1922. Article 1, based on their escape and or being present, on their not being present, sorry, the movable properties, and now these are done by the Ankara government, huh? The movable properties or individuals in the districts that are liberated from the enemy are put under the jurisdiction of the government's pertinent directorate and are sold in public auctions. As to the immovable properties and cultivated lands of such individuals, those too are surrendered to the same government directorate, and the rents and sums collected from the sale of the product of the land are deposited in the money coffers, malsamdeklare, as trust deposits after being duly registered. Very good, you know, under the cover, what was it? Under the color of law. Okay? What are the problems with this order? Can you see any problems? Those who have, based on their escape or not being present, as if Armenians out of their own will escaped or were not present at that time. Okay? You create the word, you create the description, and then apply the description to the persons. So because of that, they are going to lose their lands. They are going to lose their movable properties too. Okay? And once again, underneath, escaped and not being present is officially acknowledged. Huh? Article 5. This law is now in force, and the escapee or not being present situation of the people we are speaking about is thus acknowledged. And this is happening not only for the Armenians this time, but also for the Greek population, because the 1922 was almost the end of the nationalist war, and unfortunately, due to Western collusion and Greek, I don't know, what should I call it, stupidity, the Greek were almost massacred in Sakarya, even though the Kemalist forces were very few. I don't know how that happened. That's one of the mysteries of history that a military historian has to write about most probably someday. But I don't take out completely the issue of Western collusion in terms of intelligence being provided. We know at least that the communists were supplying the arms for Mustafa Kemal and his army. But what about the other Western powers like France, Britain, etc.? France had already signed a treaty with them, etc. Another law. Look what's happening here. In the initial law, there was a period of 4 months if the person was within the boundaries of the Ottoman Empire, and 6 months if the person was outside the boundaries of the Ottoman Empire, to come and ask for his assets. Okay? The deadlines are changed as follows: 4 months if they are within, and 6 months if they are outside. Okay? I mean, people are in the desert, okay? And there is a law that is coming out and being published most probably in the official gazette. But the real person or people who should know about it don't even know about it. Another law in 1923 regarding, now look what's happening. The initial law, remember in 1920, the Ottoman Parliament in Constantinople negated the 1915 law. Now what they are doing is that they are bringing back the 1915 law, and they are just doing altercations, okay, changes within the law, here and there. The altercations in several published laws: liquidation law regarding abandoned properties dated September 13, 1915. Law 333 dated April 15, 1923. Article 3, The immovable properties of people who are mentioned in Article 6 of the law dated April 15, 23 are thus, and from that day on, transferred to the coffers of the Ministry of Finance. This is very important because it shows where the monies went. Okay, Ministry of Finance is an address. And we know by this where most of the money for the assets of Armenian properties went. Okay. Another law, altercations, you know. After a while, even the learned person, how many altercations can you count in a law, you know? The law, altercation, altercation, altercation. I was lost like you two guys. I mean, even though I am completely aware and putting all my efforts into this, but I am confused as you because it is intentional. This kind of maneuvering of the law and the changes in it are intentional. The laws continue. Look at down there what I have written. You know what was the final date of a law that dealt with the Armenian abandoned properties issue? Marcus, you should know that.
1980?
1988. Yeah, 1988. I mean, this issue had to drag on for several decades until the final laws or final altercations of the law were put into effect in 1988. Huh?
That's probably not the last of it yet.
We don't know. Now there is another season opening up, may we say? Now, we spoke about this and gave you a certain view of what those laws are about. But why suddenly this subject is becoming a hot subject now, guys? There is an international perspective to this, there is a Turkish perspective to this, and there is an Armenian perspective to this. I think there is a collusion between the international perspective and the Turkish perspective. There is a collusion between the Armenian and the international perspective. How? If you are following the news during the past year or so, and especially during the past several months, you will see that there are lots of articles being written about the Armenian case, the Armenian properties in the Turkish media, and also you will see that there are lots of European governments, even our president and his, what's the name, Clinton's title? Secretary of State, okay? They are coming up with ideas, new ideas. They want to create this kind of atmosphere where the issue of this Armenian issue, I'm not using the word genocide, no, because it's taboo, has to be solved somewhat. And we are seeing that there are a generation of historians, new, from Turkey, from outside Turkey, who are coming up with new formulas to solve this problem. Turkey has a certain sensitivity with the word with the G word. So let's come up with a new formula for this. By the way, let me tell you something. Legally, there is some merit to what they are saying. Because even the case of the Holocaust, okay, when it was tried in Nuremberg, the legal accusation to those defenders, okay, defendants, was that they committed crimes against humanity. They were not accused of committing a Holocaust. They were accused of committing crimes against humanity. Nowadays, however, we are seeing other formulas. You know, the issue of massacres was a formula that the Turks were using a lot. Those were massacres, nothing more. Now, there is also the issue of ethnic cleansing and crimes against humanity. To the extent that I was suddenly, about a month ago, I mean, I was stupefied when I heard that our very own Professor Akcan gave a an interview in Taraf where he said that Turkey does not need to say the word genocide. It can just apologize, and then afterwards there is not going to be a political issue of land, but the properties issue can be solved by a special commission within the two governments. I thought, what governments? I mean, one is Turkey, so the other should be Armenia. But what about the diaspora Armenians, who are the real victims of this genocide? This was an important issue. I don't have an answer for it because he didn't give me an answer yet. But there are also other people who are saying the same thing, that this issue is going to be solved between the Turkey and the Republic of Armenia, and diaspora Armenians, yalla, go. We don't care about you because you don't represent a de jure, how should I say, international entity. This is a problem, guys, because we have reached a point in our struggle for the recognition of genocide where things are being taken out of their context and things are being taken out of our hands. And I have a problem with this because aside from being a historian who is in search of justice, there is also social, political, and lots of other ramifications regarding the political actions of some people or of some sides that are speaking on behalf of Armenians, even though they don't have the right to speak about on behalf of Armenians. I don't even think that the Armenian government today can speak or has the right to speak in the name of all Armenians worldwide. Okay? So, who am I? I'm not going to say that this is the policy we are going to follow afterwards. I'm just bringing to you the questions, the issues. You are intelligent people, go think about it and start thinking very hardly about it. Because those are issues that you are going to encounter in the near future. Within 3 years, there is the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide. And I have this fear that this international collusion is going to somehow solve this issue to the detriment of Armenians in general, but diaspora Armenians in particular. Thank you.
Questions? Yes.
Garo, I have a question of facts, not opinion, if you can clarify. In your opening statement, you mentioned that laws were passed from 1915 till 1928. That's what you said, but you did not show any law of 1928. However, I know from my parents that they left Turkey because after the genocide, my grandmother had returned to her home village.